There we go. Well, I'm going to start the meeting. It's a little after 6, North Country Beekeepers. And we are here with Matt Trahan from SapHouse Meadery. And Matt, you may want to come over on this side because you'll be closer to the computer microphone. And I'm going to turn this, and Matt's going to do a presentation tonight and speak about making mead.
Sure.
So here we go. And I'm going to share the screen. And we'll move our guests over here. Now, is there a way on this to make it larger?
I believe if you hit slideshow right there,
Right there.
I think that'll kind of turn it into.
There we go.
There you go.
All right.
Nice.
So when you want it changed.
And yeah, you just hit the button down there, I
Yep.
think, right?
Yep.
Cool. And roughly how long do you want me to go?
You just go for it.
Okay, well, you might come to regret that.
Well, there might be a lot of questions, so let's just go ahead with it.
Well, I hope so. Hi everybody. Thank you for taking time out of your busy days to jump in on this and thank you for having me. My name is Matt. I'm one of the owners of SapHouse Meadery. We are primarily based out of Ossipee, New Hampshire, and we've been there since 2011. But we just opened up a second location in North Conway, a little bit closer, that we're really excited about. Get into some pictures. I don't have the presentation is just kind of like some fun pictures for you all. There we go. So, and my wife Chelsea's here too, and she's probably like, "Oh my God, how did he pick those ones?" So, yeah, so we started in 2011. So the photo on the left, that's the front of our building, our original spot. And then in the top middle, that's my cousin and my business partner Ash and his wife Shayna. Right below them, that's Chelsea next to the barrel. I'm thankfully being blocked by the Zoom window a little bit. I'm up. That's me from like 14 years ago in the top right, and the bottom is an old picture of our original tasting room. So we've been going for quite a while. We have the tasting room in Ossipee. We have a full restaurant in North Conway. We distribute all around the state, and then in Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York, and New Jersey as well. Um, and I can buy it online and ship it and stuff like that. We tend mostly to try to make more wine-like, kind of drier meads. Um, but we do also have a whole line of canned, what we call draft meads or more seltzer style meads as well. Um, and we've been doing that since about 2019. This is kind of another shot of these are older pictures of the building back in maybe like the 2012, 2013 range. That's kind of the interior of our tasting room there. And then on the right-hand side, that's kind of our bottles, the primary selection that we have, the sugar maple, the vanilla, the traditional. On the left, that's Evan. He was he was our main mead maker for about 5 or 6 years. He moved on back in about 2020. As you can see, that's kind of the size tanks that we're working with. Behind him are two 500-gallon tanks. And then to the left of them are some 250-gallon. And then the ones that he's got the paddle in, that's about a 75-gallon tank. So we kind of work in those sizes generally. And then here we got in the top left, that's Andrew. He's the guy that manages New York for us, and he's obviously standing in his van on top of about 100 kegs with a cot that he sleeps in a lot. Um, he's picking up a load of kegs to bring down to the New York State Renaissance Fair, which is pretty fun. And then below that, that's we're bringing in one of our tanks with a with a front loader or excavator, whatever you call those things, because they're kind of heavy. And then on the right there, that's Jerry. That's she worked for us for many years. That's actually my wife's sister. And she's kind of up doing some mixing on some of the 200-gallon tanks.
Those are big.
They are kind of big. You could get right in them.
No thanks.
And then this is I realized I didn't have like a great like singular shot of the interior of our production space. So I apologize for all the kind of like kind of smaller ones. But so on the left there, that's Jake, Evan, and Paul. They're kind of running our canning line. Evan's teaching Paul how to do the canning, actually. Um, that's one of the more, for the most part, mead making is very simple and not overly technical. The canning machine requires a degree in engineering that I don't have, but have acquired through hard learned lessons. And then on the right-hand side, that's Ash. Again, my business partner, my cousin, he's given a tour to some folks, and that is probably the widest shot. So obviously you can see a lot of like 50-gallon tanks there too. And that's kind of a bigger shot of the production space. And then this is what most people think that we do all the time, is just like stand around and drink mead. I assure you it's not. But one thing, so that I'll get into in a little bit, is how much kind of testing and trying like small increments of ingredients that we do to try to dial in what it is we're trying to get to. So that's it. We are standing around drinking sometimes, but it is still with a purpose for the most part. Uh, I'd say that's maybe 10% of the time. 80% of the time, we're just glorified janitors. We clean a lot. This is a shot of the interior of the new North Conway space, which we're really excited about. That's Abby behind the tasting bar there, kind of giving some folks a taste.
And that mural on that tasting bar is amazing.
It's great. It's all New Hampshire
2.5
wildflowers.
Yeah, 2.5 stories of
Yeah,
wildflowers.
it's really cool.
Gorgeous, gorgeous.
A local artist named Alexis Stefano did it. And then that's our original tasting room. That's our spot down in Ossipee there. So and I think that's the last slide. So yeah, I just wanted to give you kind of a quick synopsis of us and what we're doing. As far as making mead, I guess, gosh, what would be does everybody here have like some familiarity with like what mead is? No. Okay. Okay. So mead it's an alcoholic beverage made by fermenting honey. And so in the same way that wine, is made by fermenting grapes and beer is made from barley, mead means honey. And you can make it in a whole huge range of styles. So you can make it more like a wine. You can make it more like a beer. We barrel age stuff. You can make it drink more like a spirit. It can be carbonated. It can be still. It can be sweet or dry. All that it means is that it's made from honey. And fundamentally, it's very simple to make. I'm sure you guys know so much more about honey than I do. So I'm sure that obviously honey never goes bad, right? It lasts forever. Do y'all know why that is? Why it doesn't go bad?
Well, it's usually because it's got a low water rate.
That's right. Yeah, it's such a super concentrated solution of sugar. There's so little moisture that if a yeast cell, which is what ferments, which is what makes alcohol, if a yeast cell or a bacteria cell falls into honey, instantly all the moisture inside the cell gets sucked out through osmotic pressure and it dies. So nothing can grow in it. It's physically impossible, which obviously we don't want that quality. That's a very poor quality for making fermentation happen. But all you need to do to fix that is to add some water. And the moment that you dilute it to a certain level, it becomes a wonderful medium for fermentation because it has so much simple sugar to it. So you guys right now, and in fact, you maybe, depending on what you've encountered in your beekeeping experience, have already run into it if you've tried to extract not fully cured honey when the bees haven't fully extracted all the moisture and it's still kind of runny. Sometimes that'll start fermenting spontaneously and it'll start to bubble and be kind of weird. We try to do that, but in the right way, a way that tastes good. So you could take honey, you could mix it up in a jar with some water on your kitchen counter, and leave it out. And there's enough wild yeast floating around in the air that would fall into it and eventually start replicating and fermenting, that in a few weeks you would have made mead. And you could drink it and it would be alcoholic. It certainly wouldn't hurt you. It probably wouldn't taste very good, but it would be mead. Um, and then very quickly it would turn into vinegar. But for that brief shining moment, you would have mead. The right way, the better way to do it, if you want to kind of experiment with it, is what I always recommend to people is make a 5 gallon batch, because 5 gallon buckets are everywhere, and that's an easy amount. And then you can make 5 gallons, and then you can split it into 5 1 gallon batches, and you can put different things in each one of those. You could add some blueberries to this one and some raspberries to this one, and then you would have 5 different meads for kind of like the same effort as one, because it takes so long. It takes 6 months to a year for mead to age properly and be good. So it's really be a shame.
Does that stuff that we add to it, the blueberries or raspberries, need to be frozen or freeze dried or dehydrated? Does it make a difference when we're putting it in
It
to the,
so what we always do, and there's the cool thing is that there's no real right or wrong answers, right? It's very subjective. But the way that what we recommend to people is, if you're going to add fresh fruit, which is obviously the best thing, is that you freeze it first and then thaw it out and add it, because the freezing will help to burst a lot of the cell structures of the fruit itself, and it'll make the juices and the flavor and stuff more readily kind of dissolve into the mead. So
okay,
we always recommend to freeze it first. It helps a little bit too with sterilization, though a lot of stuff can survive freezing. But that's our recommendation is to freeze everything
okay.
when you're using whole fruit.
That's one of my notes here.
Yeah, yeah. So if you do, so you basically the rule of thumb is, if you want to make a 12% mead, right? 12% alcohol by volume mead, basic traditional style, just honey mead. You would use 12 pounds of honey in a 5 gallon bucket. It's a really handy rule of thumb. For every percentage of alcohol in a 5 gallon batch, you use that many pounds of honey. So if you wanted to make a 6% mead, you'd use 6 pounds, and you want to make a 20% mead, you'd use 20 pounds. And hopefully you distill it or something after that, because it'd probably taste a little bit like jet fuel. 20% is kind of high. Then if you need to decide, do you want to have a sweet mead or do you want to make a dry mead? And if you want to make a drier mead, then you want to think about, and in this, you want to start thinking about yeast selection. What kind of yeast do you want to use? So there's an infinite number of yeasts out there. If you go to a homebrew shop, winemaking shop, anything like that, online or physically, they're going to have dozens and dozens and dozens of yeast strains available. And online, it's pretty, like I said, it's infinite. So what you want to think about is, what kind of flavor profile do I want to create? Do I want to make a more wine-like mead? Do I want to make a more beer-like mead? And there's a yeast for that. You want to look at the yeast's alcohol tolerance, because if you pick a yeast that can handle, say, 14% alcohol, but you only want to make a 12% alcohol mead, then that means that the yeast are going to get in there. They're going to eat all the honey, all the sugar, right up till it gets to 12%. And then they're gonna peter out, because there's going to be no more sugar left for them to eat. But now you're going to have a bone dry 12% mead, because the yeast could eat all the way up to 14. Like their tolerance was above what you put in for honey. So that's how you would get a dry mead. If you wanted to have a sweet mead, you would do the reverse. You would put in, say, 14 pounds of honey, so that your potential alcohol was 14%, but you'd pick a yeast that could only go to 12% alcohol. And the yeast would eat all the sugar up to 12%, and then they would again peter out, but this time they'd peter out because they couldn't handle that much alcohol. So yeast are sensitive to alcohol. Alcohol's, it is a toxin, it's poison, and it just as much to yeast as anything. And that will force them to go dormant. And now you'll have 12% alcohol, but you'll have this 2% of unfermented honey in there, thus having a sweet mead. And so that's how you kind of decide. Do you want it to be more bone dry and more wine-like? Do you want it to be more like a dessert wine? It's all in the yeast selection and how much honey you put in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I guess it would also make a difference as to how sweet your fruit is if you're gonna
Yeah.
flavor it
So
too.
that's a great point. So generally speaking, the way that we make mead, and again, totally subjective. People do plenty of mead makers out there that would argue with me all day about this. We don't, generally speaking, ferment our fruit with the honey. We always ferment the honey out and then infuse the fruit afterwards.
What's that called? Back flavoring?
Yeah,
Okay.
I always refer to it as infusing. Back sweetening is when you add honey at the end.
Okay.
And the reason that we do that, it's not what we, when we first started, it's not what we did. We fermented everything together. And when you ferment something, you really change the flavor of it. Like blueberries, you eat a blueberry, that tastes one way. And then you ferment a blueberry, and like
Totally different.
it kind of tastes a little bit reminiscent of a blueberry, but not totally. And what we found is when you put something on a label like blueberry mead and people drink it, if that doesn't taste exactly like a blueberry, like they're like, ah, it's okay, but it doesn't really taste like blueberries. Like aligning the expectation and with the label with what it tastes like inside is from a commercial standpoint, really important is was our discovery. So for us, we infuse everything after the fact because you get a more kind of authentic blueberry or raspberry or vanilla or whatever flavor to it. But that's a decision that works for us. There are plenty of people out there that make all kinds of meads where everything is all thrown in together and fermented together. And there's pros to that as well. Honey, while it has tons of sugar and it's got some interesting nutrients, for us, for yeast, it doesn't have a lot of nutrients. So adding fruit to it can give the yeast a little bit more of the proteins and the nitrogen and other things that they need to like produce a healthy fermentation. So like I said, there's no real wrong way. It's just different ways to do it.
Mhm.
And when you put something on a label like raspberries, people get grumpy with me if it doesn't taste like raspberries.
Okay.
Um, So yeah, my original suggestion would be to make a 5 gallon batch of mead. That's going to take the fermentation period itself, from the day that you mix everything up and add the yeast to it. That fermentation is going to be 3, 4, maybe even 5 weeks, which is kind of long for fermentation. It's longer than for beer and for wine. Beer and wine are relatively quick. Honey has um, it has a lot of different things. It has two primarily different sugars in it. One of them the yeast can eat very quickly, and the other one they have to kind of go into a different mode and produce an enzyme to convert. And so what happens a lot of the times with homebrewers that try mead for the first time is they'll get it going, they'll put a little airlock or a little, the rubber glove trick, whatever on top to keep the any air from getting in, but let the CO2 out. And it'll go like gangbusters for like a week or two, and then it'll die down. Like the airlock will stop bubbling, and be like, oh, it must be done. And it's not done. They've kind of switched over into that second gear, and they bottle it. And now they've bottled a mead that's still fermenting. The yeast are still producing alcohol, still producing CO2, and that CO2 builds and builds and builds and builds, and then it blows up and it gets mead all over their closet, or it hits their cat with a cork or whatever, and it's a real problem. And definitely all those things have happened. Um, and so we just, one thing I always stress with people is that like let it really run its course. The right thing to do is to get a fairly inexpensive piece of equipment called a hydrometer, which is just, it's like, it looks like a thermometer with a fat bottom, and the idea of it is it's weighted to a per particular calibration, and it's got this kind of graduated scale on it. You drop it in a liquid and it floats to a certain level based on the density. You write that number down in the very beginning, and then throughout the process, you keep dropping that in and writing the number down, and you just track the density of the liquid. And as the density drops, because alcohol is less dense than water and the sugar is going away, the density of the liquid will continue to drop until eventually it stops dropping. And at that point, you know that it's done for real, and it's not going to fake you out and blow up in your closet.
Does it have to get to a certain point that you know it's done?
So generally speaking, it will go a little bit. So we use there's a few different things. You guys are probably familiar with like bricks for honey. Do you guys use bricks?
Was gonna ask if the hydrometer is the same as like
For syrup is bricks, yeah. So we generally use specific gravity, and I know there's a pretty easy conversion to that. I don't know off the top of my head. So specific gravity 1.000 is water.
Mhm.
And so generally we're looking to get, if it's just honey and we're fermenting it out to dryness, it's going to go to a little bit less than that. It'll go to like 0.997 or 0.996
Mhm.
if there's nothing else. But if you've added fruit to it, or anything else, then it might end at, 1.01 or something like that. The main thing is less about the final gravity that it ends up at, and more that over the course of a week or so, you just see it the same number each time. That's what you're looking. You're looking for the drop, the curve of the drop to stop. And
Okay.
that's kind of what tells you that it's done fermenting. Um, and of course, in all this, I'm probably taking for granted like some kind of basic like home brewing stuff, which is you need to be very clean whenever you're doing this stuff. You need some kind of good sanitizer, food safe sanitizer. Um, we use a combination of a couple of different things. We use primarily um, phosphoric acid. It's also called Star San, is like the name of the brand. Anything that's going to get that's going to make contact with mead, you want to make sure it's sanitized so you're not introducing any wild yeasts or bacterias in there. Um, and for all the like the basic homebrewing stuff, there's a million great guides online for that kind of thing. I think any of these little things you can find. There's a ton of great books on it too for all that kind of stuff. Like, how do you siphon it over from one carboy or bucket into another? What are good sanitation practices, things like that. Um, the fermentation period, that 4 or 5 week fermentation period, at the end of that, it's going to stop fermenting. You do your hydrometer tests and you'll be good. You'll know that that you've got a fully alcoholic mead. And at that point, now the real waiting game is here, because now you got to wait for like 5 or 6 months.
Is
At a minute,
that when you add the fruit?
generally speaking, we like to wait a little bit beyond that point to ensure that the yeast have truly gone dormant. And in fact, it might even be useful to transfer it from one container to another. Like if it's in one bucket, transfer it from one bucket into another bucket and leave the bottom inch or two, because that's where all the yeast will have gone dormant and settled out to.
Okay.
Um, because what you want to do is you want to reduce the chance that in adding more fruit, you wake up
We could.
any of those yeast that might still be floating around in there, because they could wake up and they could start fermenting, and then you're kind of back to worrying about your bottles blowing up. So yeah, usually we add the fruit at maybe like the 2 or 3 month mark, give or take.
Okay.
And so for you guys, again, what I would recommend is I'd make that 5 gallon batch, and then I would transfer it into 5 1 gallon jugs. Those like cheapo wine, Carlo Rossi jugs are good for this. Because again, that you're going to wait 6 months or a year. You want to have a few different varieties to try. It's a real bummer when spend all this effort, you wait all this time, and it doesn't come out quite the way you wanted it to, and you only had one. But if you've got five, you have a pretty good shot of having one of them come out pretty good. And so I'd pick just ahead of time, 5 different flavors, blueberry, raspberry, vanilla bean, maple, um, whatever, and infuse those. Either you're just dumping the berries right in. We oftentimes will use like a cheesecloth or a muslin bag to kind of hold them together so that they could be pulled out after the fact. And then it's like I said, it's really just a waiting game. What you saw us doing in this one here. So this process right here, what we're doing is at that probably like 6 month mark. It's right before we're about to bottle it. And so what we're doing is this is a fully the fruit's been added and probably taken out, and it's aged a long time. And now what we're doing is kind of the final finishing stuff. And I don't know if you necessarily have to jump into this right away, but it is kind of fun to see the differences. So what we're doing is we're taking a little bit out of the tank, we're putting it into these little cups, and we're mixing different uh, fairly precise solutions of either back sweetening honey, to get different sweetness amounts. So like that now that mead has fermented out and say it's bone dry. And we taste it and we say, geez, it's pretty good, but it really could use a little bit of sweetness just to kind of round it out. Well, do we want it to be 0.5% sugar, honey, by volume at the end? Do we want it to be 1%, 1.5%? And so we'll mix up different solutions of each of those, 0.5%, 1%, 1.5%, whatever, and then we'll taste those and see what we think. And then we'll all kind of narrow it down. Say, you know what? The 0.5% was okay, but that 1%, that's where it landed. That really brought the raspberry flavor out, and it didn't get too sweet. It wasn't too cloying. I think that's where it should be. Okay, so now we mix everything up with the 1% at a 1% solution. So in a 50-gallon batch, we'll add a 5-gallon bucket of honey, right? 5 gallons. I'm sorry, 5 gallons and 50. That's 10%. I'm sorry, a half a gallon of a half a gallon of honey into a 50-gallon batch, 1%. We mix that up, and then we do this again, but with this little guy that Janice brought. This is some homebrew acid blend. And so this is a combination of a few different acids. This is tartaric, which is the acid that you primarily find in grapes, and malic acid, which is the acid that's primarily in apples. And then there's also citric acid, which obviously a lot of citrus, but also a lot of berries. And there's one other that I'm kind of forgetting off the top of my head, but we will do the same thing. We'll make 5 different, kind of test versions and say, okay, does the acidity need to be brought up a little bit? Does it need to be lowered a little bit? Because honey itself doesn't have a lot of acidity to it relative to, say, like a grape. Like grape wine, what people love about grape wine is that it's very tannic and very acidic. And it has that kind of drying, that kind of mouth puckering, tannic feel, makes your teeth feel furry. Honey doesn't really have that. It has a hard time kind of emulating that flavor. And so anytime you can introduce some of that, so berries have lots of tannin. So by adding raspberries, we're giving it that kind of tannic feel, but it still needs a little bit of acid. So we'll use a lot of different acid blends. That's a lot of fun because it's amazing what a little bit of acidity can do to a flavor profile. I don't know if you guys are into cooking or not, but obviously, adding a little bit of acid to a dish or to a soup or a sauce, a little squeeze of lemon, a little bit of lime will totally change the flavor and the way that it'll make certain flavors come out and make other flavors kind of hidden. The same is true of this. And it's kind of funny that most of the people that work in our production team either not either have pretty extensive culinary experience, and myself and Ash do. Before we opened the meadery, all we ever did was cook professionally. Andrew, who's currently our mead maker, was a chef for a long time. And so the way that we kind of think about making mead is starting with this kind of good base, which is good honey, and then trying to shepherd a good fermentation by, giving the yeast the nutrients that they need and make sure the temperature is right and all that. And then at the end, doing these little finishing touches. It's kind of like the same as, a little bit of salt, a little bit of spice or whatever. It's kind of the same idea. And again, there's no right or wrong way to go about it, but that's kind of how we approach it. And I think from a homebrewer perspective, if you think about it as kind of similar to cooking, it opens up it opens up what you can do. A lot of people get into homebrewing and they feel like there's all these rules and you got to do it the right way. And this is the right way. And you never deviate from the right way. And that's really not how we feel about it. We feel like it's a very creative pursuit and you can do a lot of different stuff. So I would recommend not worrying too much about, following any particular protocol. Maybe even don't even worry about what I said, but definitely try it out and approach it like you're cooking, like you're making a soup or something.
If you wanted your mead more sparkling, would you just change your yeast? Is that?
If you wanted to make the mead sparkling, there's 2 ways that you could go about it. The complicated way is the like actual traditional either bottle conditioned or like the champagne method that would be adding the perfect amount of some kind of fermentable sugar at the very end, right before you bottle it, and a little bit of live yeast. So that when you bottle it, you have a little bit of an active fermentation going on in the bottle, and they make some CO2, enough to carbonate it, but not enough to make it explode. And so you have to be pretty precise with that, which is kind of fun. Tuckerman's Brewing, which is the down in Conway, right? That they've been going for quite a while. They're one of the few breweries that I'm aware of that still uses bottle conditioning and not forced carbonation. Most breweries get carbonation in their beers by just putting the tank under pressure with CO2 and getting it to absorb that way. Tuckerman's, to my knowledge, still uses bottle conditioning. The other way to do it, the much, much more reliable way, and the way that we do it, is to do the forced carbonation. So we, in our big tank that has a glycol cooled jacket to make sure that the inside of the tank is 32 degrees, we just have what they call a carbonation stone, which is this long rod with a lot of like microscopic holes in it that you force CO2 at high pressure into, and it kind of diffuses the CO2 into the liquid. And that's how we carbonate all of our stuff. For you, for home brewing, the easiest thing to do would be to do that, but with like a keg, like just one single keg. You would fill that up with mead, and they make fittings to go on it, and you'd hook it up to a little, 5 pound, 10 pound CO2 cylinder and carbonate it that way. That'd be by far the easiest way.
No soda stream.
Well, we use SodaStream to when we're trying to test batches, actually.
Okay.
We'll fill up the SodaStream. We'll whip up an experimental, like, oh, I think maybe, blood orange and spruce tip would be kind of a fun thing. We'll mix up a little bit of that, fill the SodaStream, and we'll do it. You got to be careful because SodaStream is not meant for that.
Right.
It can get kind of messy, but we use that for experiments for sure.
Okay. Great.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have any questions? Am I the only one asking?
That's right. That's right.
Oh, Chris does. Chris, we can't hear you. You're muted.
I don't have any questions.
Oh, okay. I thought you did.
No,
I-
good, thank you.
I have a question. So are you letting it sit, like if you're gonna force carbonate it, are you gonna let it sit your 5 to 6 months before you force carbonate that?
Yeah, we do the forced carbonation right at the end, right before canning or kegging. Yep.
Okay.
Hi, I have a question.
Sure.
You said earlier, use a 5-gallon pail, put 12 pounds of honey in it. Do you add water to that?
Oh gosh, yes. Yes, definitely add water to that. So yeah, it would be like 12 pounds of honey, and then, the remainder less a little bit of room, for the water. And then
How much headspace do you need?
yeah, you probably want like maybe an inch or two of maybe a couple inches of headspace. And then you want to have the bucket. You do need some way of letting the pressure inside from the CO2 escape. And so what they make, like homebrew shops will sell these buckets exclusively for this, and they have the little grommeted hole on the top that you just stick what's called an airlock inside, and it's just a little plastic thing. You put some water in, and it's like a valve. It's a very simple valve. It lets positive pressure inside the tank come out without letting oxygen come back in.
And
Okay, so there's no definite amount of water. It's just you leave 2 inches of headspace.
Yeah, right. Okay. No, that's a great question. So there is a definite amount of water. What you're really looking for is if you're gonna go for it and you're gonna get the hydrometer, then the proper thing to do would be to plan out your recipe beforehand. And say, I want to make a 12% mead and I want it to be dry or sweet. And then you would look up, there's plenty of charts and things like that. There's probably apps now that will tell you what the starting gravity you want to be at and what the final gravity you want to be at. And you would then probably in the same app or the same charts, it would tell you, roughly speaking, how much water you needed to achieve that. You'd want to mix up the honey. You'd want to mix up enough honey with enough water so that the original mixture that you had was, call it 1.15 starting gravity or something like that. And that would be like the kind of the proper way to do it, to know your starting gravity and your final gravity. If you were just kind of more like, let's test this out and let's have a little bit of fun, you could just go by okay, well, I've got 12 pounds of honey. There's basically 5 gallons of water in there. It's probably going to be pretty close. And let's see what happens. Like there's sort of like a gradation of how serious you want to get about it.
I have a question too.
Thank you.
Does the water
Sure.
have to be a certain temperature?
It warmer is good because obviously sugary stuff dissolves better in warm water, but do not let it get above 90 degrees. Uh, Once you heat honey above that, you drive off a lot of the more volatile, aromatics and flavors. So we don't do that. We never heat the honey. There are plenty of people out there that will tell you that you need to boil the honey and boil the honey or boil the honey water mixture rather and skim the top of it. And again, there's no right or wrong answer. The way that we do it is keeping it below 85 or 90 degrees.
That's the temperature the bees keep it at.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I got a question for you.
Sure.
So, when you make like a more of a seltzer style mead, how would, beyond the fact that it's a lower alcohol content, so I'm guessing you would use that lower honey pound ratio when you start. Is there any other differentials between making a that style mead as opposed to your standard?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is an interesting area where being a commercial mead maker and homebrewing, probably best practices diverge a little bit. So for simplicity of production on our side, what we do is we make kind of a standard base of like a 12% just honey mead, and that either gets infused with fruits and spices and turned into the more wine-like styles, or if we're going to make a session mead, we will put it into a large, we'll take 250 gallons of that and we'll put it into a 500-gallon tank, and then we will add 200 gallons of water and we will dilute it down to 6%. And then that will get infused with the flavor, the berries or whatever. And then that is what we carbonate, because that's just easier for us on the production side of things. You can certainly do that as well. Make a 5-gallon batch or even a 1-gallon batch and then, cut it in half. Or you can start by meaning to make a 6% alcohol mead by using more of a beer style yeast or yeast that was a little bit lower alcohol tolerance. And because if let's say you started off and you had enough honey in there to get to 6%, but you used the typical wine yeast that could go up to 12%, you'll almost never be able to add anything after the fact. You'll not be able to do any back sweetening or adding any fruit because that alcohol level is so low, the yeast will almost always be able to reactivate. They'll almost always be able to kick back up and eat whatever fruit you're adding and cause you all kinds of problems. So you'll want to use more of a beer style yeast that's more like accustomed to that alcohol level. And then again, probably in a keg and force carbonate it would be the easiest thing to do.
So, do you find that, like, because I know like beer yeast, depending on the beer yeast you use, what you use to brew it, you'll get different flavors from the yeast.
Mhm.
So, do you find that, like, if you were to use a beer yeast instead of your traditional standard yeast that you use, you get different flavor profiles?
Totally. Yeah.
Okay.
The yeast is as much an ingredient as anything else. And we use different yeasts depending on what we're trying to accomplish. There are for a more fruity mead, we might use a yeast that's more uh that was cultivated for like honestly, this is going to sound kind of weird, but German red wine, because the way that it ferments, it produces these kind of like other compounds that accentuate the fruity flavors. Whereas if we want to make like say our vanilla bean or one of the meads that's going to go into a barrel and become barrel aged, we want that to have a little bit boozier, a little bit more of a spirit-like quality. So we'll use a champagne yeast, which gets up to 18%. And to most people's palates is a little harsher, but that kind of works in that context because if you're drinking something that's a little bit bourbony, you want it to have kind of that little bit more of that heat to it. And if you were to use a straight beer yeast, yeah, you depending on what it was. I mean, if it was a white ale, or a Belgian ale yeast, yeah, you'd get some of those kind of more clove,
Yeah.
kind of spice notes to it. And if you use something that was maybe more for, like a pale ale or something, or a pilsner rather, you'd get a cleaner, a little bit more of a cleaner, a Kolsch, not a pilsner, like a Kolsch yeast, you'd get a cleaner taste to it. So yeah, it's as much an ingredient as anything else, and it's just like another dimension that you can take the creativity into.
So if you wanted to use your, like you were saying, you make your standard mead base and then you guys cut it
Mhm.
with water. If you were to do it from the home brew or home mead standpoint, if you use that same yeast, could you basically, because you know how like when you transfer from carboy to carboy, if you do it in the 5 gallon batches, you leave that sediment, which is like your yeast product and everything else. If you do multiple transfers, would that eliminate that yeast throughout and then allow you to keep that same flavor profile from that yeast, but eliminate like having it I don't want to say recarbonate, but you're able to add those extra sugars at the end by
Yeah,
doing additional transfers to eliminate that yeast. Does that make sense?
totally. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the more, so we do 2 transfers.
Okay.
We'll do one right after primary fermentation, and then we'll do another one but we also, I mean, we will filter as well to try to like really make sure that process, keeps the yeast back. Which, obviously from a homebrew standpoint, like they make homebrew filters, but that's another level of equipment. So I would definitely recommend like maybe 2 transfers over the course of that 6 months. But the word eliminate is pretty strong. There's always going to be little yeast floating around in there. So, a lot of people will use Campton tablets or potassium metabisulfite or potassium sorbate to stabilize as well. And there's nothing wrong with that. For some of our meads, we do that for the stuff that's going to have a lot of sugar on the back end, just to prevent the possibility of a bottle bomb going off and blowing up on somebody's carpet. So yeah, the word eliminate is pretty strong, but yeah, we can definitely do some things to tamp it down.
I got one last question, if that's all
Yeah.
right.
That's all right.
So you talked about using the different acids, citric, and a bunch of other options to change flavor profiles and get that texture and flavor that you're looking for. Um, do you do that? You make your standard mead base like you talked about, and then you divvy it up in the cups and try each one. Is that just to get different flavor profiles that you're looking for?
So that process will be done at the very end after it's been flavored, after the berries are in there, the vanilla beans are in there, and honestly after they're out as well. Um, and it's kind of like it's akin to that last bit when you're making some soup and right, you do a little taste and be like, all right, just need a little bit more salt, a little bit more pepper, a little bit more heat. It's like kind of the last thing right before we bottle it, because at that point the fruit that's been in there has had a chance to like fully sort of dissolve and integrate. So it's kind of like the truest version. Like the longer you can let it sit, the more true the flavor gets. So the modifications that you're making to as close to the final product as you can get. If we did the acid and the sweetness testing, right after primary fermentation, what we're adjusting based on that baseline might change, because over the course of that 6 months, the flavor of that mead is going to change. So we do it right at the end.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
You bet, man. Thank you.
I did have one question about like the honey that you guys used.
Sure.
Notice like, is the quality of the honey, do you guys use like local honey or spring, or is there any type of honey that tends to make a bigger difference, or does it all just kind of, is it just more of a food source for the fermentation process?
Yeah, the honey matters a lot. And we definitely do have some preferences to it. I wish we could use local honey. But we go through quite literally tons of honey a month. And to my knowledge, I'm hope maybe there's a secret producer here that I don't know about that has 10,000 hives here in New Hampshire. If anybody knows that person, please send them my way. We go through so much honey that it doesn't make sense to try to do. It's impossible to do locally. That being said, we do have pretty high standards for the honey that we do get. And it's less about I mean, like honey, as long as it's real and it's not adulterated with, high fructose corn syrup or whatever. Technically honey is all pretty consistent, but flavor wise, we will generally tend towards, I mean, domestic honey is best. We have been playing with some like wildflowers from South America a little bit that are kind of interesting. But generally speaking, it's domestic. Generally speaking, we like to ferment the more polyflorals because it's more of a neutral kind of baseline. And then for back sweetening, we really like either California or Mexican orange blossom honey. Florida orange blossom honey has this kind of like bitter pithiness that doesn't really play well, but the California and the Mexican orange blossom has this really nice jasmine quality to it that is, we think, very like, I don't know, just sort of like accentuates the idea of the flavor that people have of honey in their minds. And then on top of that, we do a ton of stuff with really specific monoflorals. And so we will pair a monofloral honey. We'll get something in, like say an avocado blossom honey. And we'll taste it and we'll say, okay, that's cool. That's got this kind of like nutty dark fruit note to it. What would that go well with? And we think about the spirits and the cocktails out there that might that it makes us think of. And then we will be like, oh, you know what? That'd be really interesting with like a tequila note to it, that kind of like agave. And so then we'll go out and we'll find a old tequila or mezcal barrel, and we will ferment that avocado blossom honey for 6 months, and then we'll age it for another 6 months in that mezcal barrel. And so we're pairing the monofloral honeys with spirit barrels. That is a lot of fun, and we have again, a whole other dimension of creativity that we can get lost in.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, of course.
That's where your culinary taste buds really come in to play.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does your water play a big role in the flavor like it does in beer?
Yeah, I would imagine so. I mean, we've been in the same place for 14 years, so we've never tried to make any of these recipes with other water. That might be kind of an interesting experiment someday to like truck in water from somewhere else and see what the difference was. But you're 100% right that it's pretty crucial in beer making. That water chemistry will totally change the flavor.
In Ossipee, are you on a well?
No, it's town water, so
Okay.
So
it's been treated.
It has been treated. Yeah. We have a filtration system, for sure. But yeah, no, we can't change water now. It's got to be Ospey water forever.
Do you guys use like an RO?
We don't have an RO. No, it's
Really?
Because
What's an RO?
reverse osmosis.
Oh,
Osmosis.
Yeah, no. Because when we started down there, we were just a couple of kids doing it nights and weekends. So we bought one of those kind of like whole house, physical charcoal filters. And again, we don't want to mess with anything, so it's the same thing.
We're seeing some of the breweries here run RO. So when they move locations and stuff like that, it doesn't affect the flavor profiles they get out of their beers. That's why I was curious if it made a big difference or not.
I mean, that's in hindsight, that's a very smart way to start for sure. Start with the neutral stuff that you can modify. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Well, great questions. Anybody else have any other questions? Everybody gonna run to their cabinet and start making mead? Try it?
I hope so.
That would be. Oh, I'm gonna bring you some that a friend made for me.
It is. Yep.
Yeah, SapHouse is at Berlin Marketplace.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah.
One of them is a picture of.
Did-
I think that was on a rack kind of.
Yeah, I know, it's right by the veggie section. There's like a display.
Yeah.
You saw my display up there? Okay. Yeah, yeah, they carry our stuff now.
Did you cover how much fruit to use for different batches?
Oh, no, I didn't. That's a
Good
great
question, Brenda.
Yeah, that is a good question. So, oh man, in a 50-gallon batch right now, we will generally use something like 150 pounds of say like a blackberry. Like I'm trying to think what we just made
So that
recently.
would be 1.5 pounds.
1.5 pounds per gallon. So in a 5-gallon, that's 7.5, 8 pounds, give or take. Yeah, great question. And I will say that there's no good rule of thumb when it comes to that kind of stuff. It's really a matter of you kind of got to add it and then taste it and say that seems like enough or that doesn't seem like enough. The other thing that I didn't mention is when you're adding that fruit and infusing that fruit, there's a sweet spot for time. So, and it's different for almost everything, but if you add blackberries, like you put them in like a muslin bag or a cheesecloth, you put them in that bucket of mead, and then it sits for a week, and maybe at that point, it's pretty good. You get some good raspberry flavor, some good blackberry flavor. If you leave it too long, which for different fruits is different, maybe it might for blackberries, maybe 2 weeks or 3 weeks is too long. It'll start to over extract. It'll start to pull out some of the more bitter stuff in the skins, and you'll start to get
Seeds.
some seeds and yeah, all that. It'll get kind of bitter and acrid, and you don't want that. So oftentimes, what we will do is we will add the fruit, let it sit for a week, and then take that fruit out. If we feel like it needs more flavor, we won't put that fruit or back in or leave that in. We'll add fresh stuff and let that go for a week and take that out and keep that process up if we feel like it needs more of a fruit flavor, because you don't want to over extract it. Some stuff like we do some tea infused meads where it only needs to go in there for 45 minutes, and if it's in there for 55 minutes, it's too much. I did that once. I got a phone call at like minute 37 and didn't get back to it until minute 58, and it was over extracted and it wasn't very good. So sometimes you got to be careful.
Good question, Brenda. Okay, if there's no other questions, we're gonna thank Matt
Cool. Thank you so much.
Kelsey for their time here.
Yeah, I really
Thank you.
appreciate it. Yeah.
Appreciate it,
Yeah.
and I encourage all of you to head over to the new facility that they have in North Conway. It's beautiful and inviting. Great menu.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. And if you ever have any other questions or you get into it, just shoot us an email, give us a call, and talk to homebrewers about stuff all the time.
okay. Great,
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
All right. Time to go.
Laurel says, I'm always up for a road trip to the North Country. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, we're gonna go get some honeycomb ice cream now.
Yeah, go get some honeycomb ice cream. Awesome.
Thank you. It's great to meet you.
Okay. I'm not muted again, am I? I shouldn't be.
No, I can hear you, Jan.
Okay, all right. Heather can't hear me. She must have it off on her end. Couple of quick things. I just need a quick vote for our members that we can change banks. and open a new bank account with our treasurer, so it's more convenient for her to do our banking. So we'd be changing from Northern Lights Credit Union to Service Credit Union. So I'd like to hear a motion for that.
A motion.
Jan, I move to go from Northern Lights to Service Credit Union.
Do I have a second?
Second it. I'll third.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Okay. The ayes have it. And I'll set up a time with Barb to go and take care of that. I am going to put a link on our webpage to go to a calendar to sign up for times for the
The co-op.
co-op in April.
What was the-
And those they're gonna be Saturday mornings in April.
Oh, all the Saturday.
All the Saturday mornings in April, but if it's just an hour, sign up for that hour. That'd be great. Just so we have somebody there all the time.
What would we do there, Janice?
We're gonna have paperwork there for you to hand out, make sure everybody gets it into their bags when they check out.
Let's
So
just-
wear your crazy bee shirt or crazy bee hat and, you know, or your little, and I have the antennas. So yeah, we try to do that and garner up conversation. I can give you some swag. I'll make sure it's left there in a box for whoever's going in at different times. Swag for the kids. We have the bead tattoos,
Oh,
rub-on tattoos and stuff like that. So we try to get as much conversation going with them and get them interested in saving our bees and reduce their spraying here in the North Country. Swag online. I had some people ask me about t-shirts because I only have like 3 left for North Country Beekeepers logo on it. And they're like extra, extra large. They're very large size. How does everybody feel about? Okay. With 6:59 PM, Barbara's wrist just told us. How does everybody feel about going with one of the services that people can order online and it just gets sent directly to them? And
there's no middleman then.
there's no middleman except we get part of the cut.
I like that.
That sounds
I'm in.
easy.
Yeah, it's a pretty easy process. We don't make as much as we do if we had all the stock, but we don't have to keep the stock and put out the money ahead of time. It's just kind of an easy flow.
Are you gonna be able to pick what kind of piece you want, or is
Yeah,
it?
yeah, we can pick what we want. Yeah.
Okay.
So we can pick hats, we can pick, you know, cups, we can pick t-shirts, hoodies, you know, whatever. And then they can pick their size, kid
Got
size, adult size.
Yeah, I looked into that before, so okay. I was just curious.
What else here? So what does everybody think about that? You want me to do a little more research on it? I can do that and send it out for everybody to look at the links. How about that?
That works. I'm okay with that.
All right. It's March. This is the time of year that we
Of course. We're like getting close.
we need to update our buckets, get our buckets all ready for the spring. And I have a quick list here. If anybody wants to get a pencil and a pen. Your hive tool, your queen clip, a queen cage, in case you have to cage her and leave her in the hive caged. Scissors, screwdriver, hammer, small needle nose pliers, magnifying glass, bee brush, your choice, lighter, torch, or matches. extra smoker fuel, a sprayer with sugar water, a queen catcher, quart-size Ziploc bags. You're probably saying, oh, what am I going to use those for? There's a lot of things you can use your Ziploc bags for. You can put Burcomb in them. You can, if you want to take bees for testing or take a better look at them, afterwards, you've got a place to put them. If you have a pollen trap and you're gathering pollen, you might want a gallon size Ziploc bag to put that pollen in. Nitrile gloves, Benadryl. I do not recommend getting the liquid Benadryl. I recommend getting the children's chewables and double up the dose for the adults. EpiPen if required. Large rubber bands. Gorilla tape works much better than duct tape. Toothpicks, notebook and pencil, or if you've got your smartphone, you want to make sure you have a note app on it. A jackknife, flashlight, reading glasses. Even if you don't use reading glasses or have bifocals like me, you may want to get a cheap pair from the dollar store just to have, because there's times that it's pretty tight to see. Mite test kit. So you want to have extra rubbing alcohol or the Ultradon with water. Sharpie, queen marking pen, a water bottle for yourself is important. Any feed or medications you think that they may need. And spare nails for frames. How many times have we tried to lift a frame, especially after the winter and the top snapped off? You may want to have that extra nails just to get it put back together on the spot. Your cell phone for pictures and videos. Metal bucket for your smoker. And your mite testing equipment, either the jars with the strainer and the coffee filter or Varroa Easy Check. And two other things you may want to keep in your wagon or near your bee yard, or if you travel to your bee yard in your car, is a swarm kit and a flat packed box. And I say flat packed, we don't need to carry big cardboard boxes around, but if you have a flat packed box, you have a box that you can put a swarm in short term. You can tape it up because you've got your tape in your bucket. So that comes in handy. Laurel says Benadryl and Pepsid. Pepsid is what we use in the chemo infusion lab for reactions. There you go. So that works. That's a long list, but I can get almost all of those in a 5-gallon bucket that has one of those great little tool caddies in it.
Can you send this out in an email or post it in the chat so I can copy it?
I will send it out. How about that?
Excellent.
Matter
Thank
of fact, I know Joe already did the March. Did everybody get the March newsletter? Yeah. Yeah, Joe already did it, but I'll send out another one to our newsletter email list for people.
Thank you.
It's just a nice reminder plus it gets you to empty the bucket out from the fall, get rid of all the crud that's at the bottom of it, clean it out and be ready fresh for our bees. So, I will email you what we do with the Pepsid and what has been given to me when I had anaphylactic reaction. That's great, Laurel. Thank you. Appreciate it. Somebody's talking and I don't hear what they're saying. Did you hear that?
Yeah, I heard somebody.
Yeah.
But I couldn't tell what they were
Couldn't tell what it was. So
Probably my son in the background, sorry.
Either that or it was Josh in the background talking. He
I
mum-
love that you just blamed him for that and I was on mute.
But whoever it was kind of mumbled like Josh, so. I love you, Josh.
He's taking care of Sap right now, so.
Okay. All right. Oh, and for those of you that are following all the things that I've had going on in my life, Sadie's pathology came back, our little Sadie girl. And her 3-inch mass that she had on her spleen that they took out 2 weeks ago is benign. So we're really happy about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she's on the mend, getting
Very
back,
good to hear that.
back to her crazy self.
Mhm.
So does anybody have any particular issues that they want to throw out here today? If not, I'm going to call the meeting. And maybe go get some ice cream.
Oh,
I'm sorry, Heather.
oh.
Favorite place is super secret. When she comes up here, she goes home with a cooler full.
My
So
stash is almost gone. I'm waiting for May.
I'm gonna be down in April with Mom's for her appointment.
Okay.
So if you need something before that. But I will get this out to you, Brenda. And I'm so glad to see Brenda.
Thank you.
Laurel is our outgoing secretary and Brenda is our incoming treasurer for New Hampshire Beach First. So it's
So-
nice to have them on.
I know you recorded today's talk with Matt. Are you going to send that out to us? Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it'll go out to the members.
Thank you
Absolutely.
very much.
So we share it with the other 2 clubs, but I send it out to the members. So, and those that were in attendance. Okay,
Thank you.
okay. Everybody stay warm. Rick, stay safe.
Have a wonderful night. Thank you for the invite again. It was great.
Thanks.
Thank you. It was good.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good night.